Hello and welcome to Castle's Corner. I am of course Coach Castle, and today I'll be bringing you another argument for intelligent exercise. Now, in this particular argument, I'm going to be talking about physics and how they affect exercise and sports, and why if you don't already, you really need to care. So, physics are your friend. Doesn't matter if you are a bodybuilder, soccer player, basketball player, endurance athlete of any form, doesn't matter. Having even a basic understanding of the laws of physics will greatly enhance your capacity for growth in all areas, as well as providing efficiency and knowledge for all aspects of your life. So it really does carry over into everything, having a basic understanding of physics. So to start off with some basic physics principles, first, you'll need to know more about Newton's laws of motion to understand basically how they apply to your muscle growth and your particular sport. So, Newton's first law of motion is that an object continues in a state of rest or in a state of motion at a constant speed along a straight line unless compelled to change that state by a net force. Now, the simple translation for that is if you don't apply a force to an object at rest or in motion, it will stay at rest or in that same motion along a straight line forever. The simplest way to illustrate this would be the example of a soccer ball. So, a soccer ball that is sitting still on the grass will not move until acted upon by an outside force, such as being kicked or be hit by a stick or something. Now, a soccer ball that is moving across the grass will not stop unless it is stopped by an object. Now, that is technically correct. However, the world's not quite that cut and dry, as you know, and there's already going to be another force involved that we have to talk about whenever any object is in motion, and that, of course, is known as friction. Now, a simple definition of friction would be the force that slows down a moving object as it acts in the opposite direction to the way that the object is moving. So let's take the soccer ball example. The friction force moves the opposite direction that the soccer ball is rolling in. So as the ball rolls forward, friction slows the ball's momentum ever so slightly until the ball finally comes to a complete stop. Now, I know what some of you may probably already be thinking. Well, doesn't that sound like it's contradicting Newton's first law? Well, don't worry, it doesn't. Friction is an outside force that is acting on the object. So, just like the law says, friction is acting on the object and it is slowing it down. Now, if there weren't any friction, the ball, of course, would continue rolling, and that is true as far as we know for everything in this world. At least currently, it is impossible to create a frictionless environment. But now, anyways, moving on to Newton's second law of motion, and that is that the force of an object is equal to the object's mass times its acceleration or speed, which basically means that something has more mass. If something has more mass, it's going to take a lot more force to move it. So just very simple. Have you ever tried to pick up a heavy box? Well, of course you have. It takes a lot of energy or force, obviously. You think of the deadlift, and you have to pull significantly harder than you would need to pull or lift or apply force for a box even half of its size. Now, if you just apply the same idea to sports, if something is lighter and you give it a kick or force, it's going to accelerate much more rapidly away from you than, say, something like a baseball or a hockey puck. As these are heavier and have more mass, they need a lot more force to get them to fly the same distance. Now, this is important in sports because the mass or weight of a piece of equipment determines how far it will go when you apply the force. So, basketballs, soccer balls, volleyballs, beach balls, these tend to be lighter and have less mass. But things like baseballs and hockey pucks need the batter or hockey player to pull back their stick before hitting the ball or the puck. So the action of pulling back the arm and the stick gives them a greater force or greater centrifugal force, propelling it further and faster. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. But for now, let's talk about momentum in exercise. So, one of the most common mistakes made during strength training is the use of momentum. Now, for everyday movements, and even many athletic movements, the use of momentum is normal, adaptive, and in many cases necessary to generate more force to propel the object further and faster. It is the body's way of conserving energy, particularly during running, throwing, or pushing. However, during strength training or muscle building, momentum is counterproductive. Now, this is because it decreases the work that a muscle does, thereby decreasing the effectiveness of the exercise. And what's worse is it's dangerous to the joints and the spinal cord, since it overloads these areas, causing unnecessary wear and tear, let's say. Now, to understand what the use of momentum looks like during strength training, picture a ball with a string with a ball suspended from it. Now, the muscle joint is the point of rotation, or the top of the string, and the leg, arm, or torso, with or without the weight, is the ball at the end of the string. Now, picture the ball swinging back and forth at the end of the string like a hypnotist would use, basically the old pendulum. Now, when momentum is used during strength training, the exercise is characterized by this same swinging motion, the old bicep curls, all these things. The exerciser who's doing whatever momentum movement may appear to be bouncing or swaying their whole body. Now, one exercise in which momentum is very easy to see and basically always employed is the back extension. So when momentum is used, the person exercising looks like they're dropping their torso due to gravity, and then they swing up. Now, that swing up is only stopped by the mechanical limits of the spine, and of course this technique fails to actually train the erector spinal muscles and places dangerous loads on the spine. So it's basically, once again, just an example, easy example of somebody swinging up and down and not actually training the muscle group that they're attempting to train. Cheat bicep curl is another simple example to follow. But anyways, to understand the way that momentum will work, it's important to grasp the concept of Newton's second law of motion. Now, previously mentioned the law of acceleration, which just states that a net force on an object will accelerate it or change its velocity in proportion to the magnitude of the force and in the same direction as the force. So, just to make that simpler, the rate of change in the momentum of a body is proportional to the applied force and takes place in the direction in which the force acts. So, during strength training, momentum is additive as it gains strength with each repetition due to the force or the bounce being multiplied. So, as the exercise becomes faster, the muscles work less and the joints in the spine work more because the exerciser is using momentum rather than forcing the muscles to do the work. Now, just to keep it very simple, momentum is basically defined by just two things: the mass, or the size of the exerciser, and the weight and velocity, or speed. So the larger the exerciser is, basically the more mass they have, the more weight they lift, the faster they move, and the fewer constraints that are placed on their movements during the exercise, as are the greater the risk caused by using the momentum. So a big fat guy doing a cheat bicep curl can do a heavier cheat bicep curl than a skinny guy. Just simple example. Now, momentum is of course the enemy of any intelligent bodybuilder. Momentum is a type of force that is typically produced by jerking a weight, and it will dramatically reduce the load on the target muscle when used during resistance exercise, but it will be damaging your joints and your tendons and all these things. The use of momentum is typically seen in some form of an effort to use heavier weight than the target muscle is actually capable of handling. Again, why they would do a cheat bicep curl, for example. And this is why it's referred to as a cheat bicep curl. It's referred to as cheating, bad form, ego lifting, and that's because it's not as productive. It's just typically not explained at length like this. Now, using a weight that is too heavy for a particular muscle and then compounding your error by using momentum, inducing additional wear and tear whilst compromising the movement is not a good strategy. It is very inefficient and, as previously mentioned, damages your body a lot more. Now, just to keep this really simple, there's actually a formula to calculate how much load the levers of your body are actually exerting upon the muscle. I'll tell it to you real quick just because I think it's interesting. The basic formula is, it's a basic formula for determining the amount of magnification of a given lever. And it's resistance times the resistance arm length equaling the force times the force arm. Now, all this means is that the resistance is the amount of weight which is placed upon the end of the lever. The resistance arm is the length of the lever between the effort and the load. So the force simply represents the amount of muscle force required to move the lever, and the force arm is just the distance between the pivot point and the point at which the effort is applied on the lever. So this same formula applies to all levers everywhere in the world, including the bones in your body. And although these three factors may change the position in the equation depending on what type of lever is being used. But this simplified math will give you an idea of how much you're actually loading a muscle with and how efficient is the lever that you're actually using, basically. So a simple example would be a bicep curl, I guess. So when you're performing a bicep curl using a 10-pound weight, the simplified math would be basically just the 10-pound weight multiplied by the 12 inches or length of my forearm. Then, as I do not know yet how much force is required to lift the movement, that's what I'm actually solving in this particular calculation. What I do know, though, is that the length of the force arm is 1 inch. Now, that's just where the muscle actually connects on the bone. So again, once again, the distance between the pivot and the hinge, so the elbow and where the bicep tendons connects to my forearm. And so to do the math, it'll be 10 pounds times the 12-inch lever equaling 120. And 120 divided by the 1-inch length of the fourth arm will total a force of 120 pounds. So just to put that in perspective, the next time you lift a 10-pound dumbbell and it reaches the parallel position with the ground, where it's a maximum or 100% lever, your bicep is actually being loaded with 120 pounds of load, not the 10-pound weight in your hand. Now, this is just a simple example of math used in this exercise, but for the vast majority of people, this is completely unnecessary information to know. It's simply important to understand that it exists and the method and kind of have an instinctive feel for it. Now, of course, you can use levers inefficiently by not following the correct resistance curve or by doubling a lever. Doubling a lever, that happens when you stack two levers on top of each other, meaning you must subtract that distance from the actual force arm. So a simple example, I hate these, but would be upright rows. So when you're doing a movement like this, your humerus or upper arm bone and your forearm, well, they stack on top of each other at the conclusion of the movement. So, and of course they have, varying angles whilst performing the movement where they're not necessarily stacked on top of each other. But let's just say, hypothetically, your forearm is going to be 12 inches and your upper arm is also going to be 12 inches. Now, at the conclusion of the movement, both of these levers, if I can get it right here, they're going to be stacked almost perfectly up on top of each other, meaning very little load transference to the lateral deltoid, which is the target muscle in this exercise. Now, this is because the length of the actual lever being used is only 2 to 3 inches because of the doubling effect. Now, the reason that people will typically perform this movement is because it allows them to lift extremely heavy weight. So no doubt in their minds, loading their lateral deltoid more than if they simply lay on their side and then fully extended their upper arm and their forearm, creating a 24-inch lever with the correct resistance curve, and only use like a 10 or a 12, 15-pound dumbbell. Thus, they would maximally load their lateral deltoid without any wear or tear on their shoulder joints or straining the spine in any way. But 10 to 12 pounds doesn't look nearly as impressive as a 225 pound loaded barbell, even though the load of the lateral deltoid is the same. Heavy weight, unfortunately, does not mean heavy load being delivered to the target muscles. This is what people don't seem to understand. More often than not, it means a compromised movement, which is damaging your body and very inefficiently loading your muscles. But anyways, let's move on to Newton's third law of motion. So this is an easy one. For every reaction, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Now, most of you have heard this before, but again, very simple to understand. It basically means every time you push on something, it pushes back on you. Now, to be clear, it's not always an actual push back at you. It's not like little hands reach out of the wall and push you. When your foot hits the ground as you run, the ground doesn't push on your foot. What is happening is that the same force you are directing into the ground with your foot comes back from the ground into your foot. Now, if that's complicated, just give me a second, I'll try to make it simple. A simple way to understand this is that the force from your foot goes into the ground. Now, this is the gravitational force times your body mass. The force from the ground, called the normal force or the ground reaction force, it travels through your foot and up your legs. Basically, your foot experiences two opposing forces of equal value at the same time. And this is why you don't sink into the ground with every single step that you take, obviously. Now, the more you push, or the more force you actually apply, the faster and further you will go, depending on the angle of impact. So if you apply a lot of force down and you jump straight up, you'll go higher. If you angle yourself forward, you go further forward. Now, the next thing we'll be discussing is levers both in the body and outside, and how they affect your performance and efficiency. Now, a simple definition of a lever is that it's a simple machine. And simple machines are devices with very few moving parts. Some of them are very simple, such as a wedge. They don't have any moving parts. They're simply used to help people do work. A ramp, a doorstop, a teeth. You have several simple machines in your body. Your body is comprised of 3 separate lever types: type 1, type 2, and type 3. Again, your teeth act as wedges. Your arms and legs are levers. Your spine and feet are groups of levers, and they act as one lever, or an appendage. Now, a lever has 2 parts: a long beam and a fulcrum, or pivot. The beam is the long straight part of the lever. In the human body, think of the humerus or the femur. The fulcrum, or the pivot, is the point where the lever moves. In the body, this would be a joint acting as a pivot or a hinge, the elbow joint, something like that. The load is not the weight you are actually lifting, but what the muscle is actually being loaded with after adding the lever magnification and then multiplying by the lever efficiency. Now, depending on the location of the fulcrum or the pivot in relation to the rest of the lever, basically we'll classify what sort of lever it is. So, a lever that is perfectly parallel with the direction of resistance, for example, is a neutral lever, meaning no force is required for it to stay in its place. This is why buildings are built upright, lampposts are built upright. Basically no force is required, they're anchored. Now, a simple example again would just be balancing dominoes. As a simple example, they stand unaided due to being perfectly neutral with gravity and have no outside forces acting upon them. A lever that is perfectly perpendicular with the direction of resistance is a fully active lever, meaning it is at its heaviest in that position in terms of the effort required to hold it there, with all other factors being equal. So think about performing a bicep curl and stopping with your arm in the 90-degree position. Once again, this is a 100% lever, or a maximum active lever. This is the furthest the weight can be from your body. Therefore, the lever is the longest as possible, and the load is as far from the pivot point where the elbow is possible. And also, depending where you put the load on the lever, will determine the magnification of the load. So let's just take using levers in the context of tennis, for example. When you're playing tennis, your arm is the lever and your elbow is the fulcrum of the pivot. Now the tennis racket acts like an extension of your forearm, increasing the length of the lever. Now, this of course is going to further magnify the amount of force you are able to generate at the conclusion of the swing because it is a longer lever. Also, tennis rackets are bouncy. Of course, your shoulder too, that can also be a fulcrum or pivot. A simple example would be golf. Players keep their arms straight when they hit the ball. Now this is increasing the already long length of their golf clubs, creating a very long lever, able to generate tremendous force at the conclusion of the swing. Now this of course drives the golf balls way away, and even in some cases with enough force to leave the gravity of the earth and they land on the damn moon. Now, the more rotational force applied, as well as the longer length of the lever, results in greater magnification of force at the tip, or the conclusion of the movement, where you're hitting the ball. So this means the shoulder would be the fulcrum, the entire arm plus the golf club is the beam or the lever. Now this, of course, is the importance of understanding levers in sports. But what about in bodybuilding? In bodybuilding or weight training, of course, your body's still a machine composed of these 3 different levers, and your muscles basically will cross 2 of these levers, like your bicep, over the point of the pivot or the fulcrum, and pull these 2 levers together. That's what the bicep does. It pulls the forearm towards the humerus. Now this is how you perform all movements: bicep curl, breathing, walking, lifting any weight. So of course, efficiently using your levers for maximum results is very important, so you get the most bang for your buck, and of course, so you don't damage your body or waste your damn time. Now, let's touch on the subject of gravity. So, this is a very important subject that we all kind of instinctively know, but we don't really know how it necessarily affects us. So, gravity is just the force that pulls everything towards your center, and the force is measured in terms of acceleration, or basically meters per second squared. So if you assume that any object moving upwards has a positive acceleration, then anything moving downward must have a negative acceleration. So, I mean, for example, gravity on Earth is negative 9.8 meters per second squared, in case you're curious. But why would you need to know about this phenomenon in regards to sports or weightlifting? Well, in terms of sports, let's, simple example, throwing a ball. So, you got a ball, you're going to throw it. Okay? Everybody does this, play catch with the dad. Now, when you throw a ball in the air, and the ball accelerates upward and forward and horizontally to the ground, the instant the ball leaves your hand, gravity begins to act on the ball, pulling it back towards the ground. Now, even though the ball wants to travel upward and horizontally, the longer the ball travels, the greater the force of gravity becomes. You can also see when gravity starts to win the battle, because that's called the apex, or when the ball begins to curve downward, when it's reached its highest possible point and then starts to come back down. Now, eventually gravity will always win and the ball will land on the ground. What goes up must come down, well, unless it reaches escape velocity. I mean, again, there are golf balls on the moon, so it is possible. Now, this type of movement is called a projectile motion. And as it happens in every sport with a ball, baseball, basketball, tennis, lacrosse, golf ball, volleyball, everything, balls that are thrown, kicked, or hit travel along the same projectile motion track or arc. Now, in case you're unable to visualize this, just go outside with a friend, get a ball, stand 10, 20 feet apart, throw the ball to your friend. As the ball goes towards your friend, notice it's going to go up and then down again. Now, doesn't matter what type of object you throw, kick or hit, as long as it's put into motion in this same manner, it will follow a same curved path due to gravity. Now, without getting like super technical and giving you guys more equations and math and stuff, the easiest way to predict where a ball will land is simply to find and then follow its apex. So again, the apex is the highest point in the curve, or the parabola, or the arc of movement. And once the ball hits this apex, it will curve more rapidly towards the ground. Now, that is because at that point, the force of gravity has slowed the velocity enough that the ball loses speed. The loss in speed causes the ball to lose height and distance. I mean, I could keep getting more technical with thermodynamics and again in math and stuff, but just you can visually get a very good instinctive feel for this just by practicing. So basically, if you want to be a great thrower or great catcher, learn to find the apex of the throw and then follow the curve of the apex down with your eye, and eventually you'll be able to figure out exactly where the ball will land. And then the trick there is just to get there before it does, using your levers efficiently. So you're going to learn about running and stuff next. So basically think of it like an imaginary rainbow predicting the ball's landing location. But now that's dealing specifically with athletic sports like throwing, catching, or using some form of athletic instrument. But how do gravity and levers work together inside of your body during exercise? So, as previously mentioned multiple times now, I'm going to keep saying it, your body's a machine subject to the laws of physics. The human body is made up of levers, bones are the levers, appendages are groups of bones as well, and they're acted upon by muscles, which cross over joints or fulcrums. Joint movement is then produced when the muscles crossing these joints contract and shorten. Now, all levers magnify resistance and force, and the universal laws of physics as they apply to levers work the same inside your body. So what this means is that all resistance exercises, any form of weight training that you perform, are all subject to the magnification of force, as well as a few other mechanical principles. Nothing too complicated, but understanding and complying with these principles allow you to work out with optimum efficiency. Basically, if you know this stuff and you start here and somebody who doesn't know this stuff, they start here, you're going to be miles ahead of them way faster, just because you know more. Now remember when we talked about levers, the neutral and the perpendicular? Well, when a lever or bone is positioned at an angle such that the muscle is able to pull on it perpendicularly, it is called a mechanical advantage. Now this position is the most efficient angle from which a muscle can pull on a bone. So basically think about how your bicep looks at the conclusion of a bicep curl. The bicep is fully contracted, the forearm is as close to your upper arm as possible, and when a bone is positioned at an angle such that a muscle is only able to pull on it from an angle that is mostly parallel with resistance, this is what's called a mechanical disadvantage, because this is the least efficient angle from which a muscle can pull on a lever, and significantly more force is required to produce limb movement. So if you imagine my bicep connects up here and down here, a couple guys up here, and they have ropes, that's the bicep, connects to the forearm. It's a lot harder for them to pull from this angle than from this angle. This is mechanical advantage, and this is mechanical disadvantage. So basically, beginning a bicep curl when your upper arm and forearm are parallel with gravity is good, long story short. And then there are various angles between the perpendicular and the parallel from which a muscle can pull on its lever or bone, and these additional angles represent the resistance curve start to finish. So just imagining the arc that a dumbbell would be making when I was performing a bicep curl. It's going to start off at the mechanical disadvantage, and then it's going to go to 90 degrees. This is going to be a 100% active lever, and then the forearm is going to get as close to the upper arm as possible, being fully contracted, and this is going to be a mechanical advantage. Now this is just the mechanical aspect of it, but it should also be mentioned that the bicep is, of course, weakest here and strongest here, as it needs to be. So this would be following the correct resistance curve. But anyway, so that's the simplified version of the resistance curve, at least demonstrated with the bicep, but all of the muscles in your body follow these rules. And for an exercise to be maximally beneficial or efficient, the active lever or bone should pass through this exact resistance curve. Now there are many different types of resistance like resistances typically used in resistance exercise, and each type will create a unique resistance curve. Now, because it provides a different direction or feature of resistance, basically. So just as far as resistances go, I'll address a few of the pros and cons of some of them. So in terms of resistances, an easy example everybody knows would be a free weight or dumbbells, barbells, body weight exercises. Now, free weight is very easy to understand, as the direction of resistance will always be straight down, because even though you can't see it, gravity, you now know, well, you did know, but you know even more about it now, is always there, and it pulls straight down. So just think of an invisible plumb line attached to your dumbbell. Now, you have a second kind of resistance. These are cables. Cables produce a direction of resistance that follows the angle of the cable, meaning the line that the cable itself makes is the line of resistance or gravity. So think of it as gravity being redirected, and the cable itself is a visible representation of gravity. Another kind of resistance would be resistance bands. And resistance bands are like cables in the sense that the direction of resistance is coming from the location or origin where it's anchored, like if you're standing on it. However, unlike with the cables, the resistance provided by the elastic bands is directly opposite the resistance curve. Now, this is why I don't like resistance bands. I don't recommend you use them for anything, actually, as they have basically no function, at least in terms of intelligent exercise, generally speaking. Not many caveats to that. I can only think of like two. Now, muscles have a strength curve, which allows them to be stronger when they are elongated, or the mechanical disadvantage, and less strong when they are contracted or shortened, because they have less room to move or contract. Now, the ideal resistance curve for an exercise, as already mentioned a second ago, should follow the strength curve of the muscles, the natural one, the one I just went over. In other words, an exercise should provide more resistance when the muscle is elongated and less resistance when the muscle is contracted. But if you think about a resistance band or a freaking rubber band, whatever you want to call it, an elastic band, you'll be performing a bicep curl. You have to understand this is the exact opposite of the correct resistance curve. This is literally opposite. Think about what happens. In the beginning, no resistance. The conclusion where you're weakest, maximum resistance. Doesn't make any sense. But anyways, then there's different machines. Now, most gym machines have different cams or ways to alter the resistance of the exercise. The cam is just that if you're sitting on any particular machine, you'll see the cable attached to the weight stack. The cable then typically go over either a circular or an oblong, or perhaps a half circle shape. The cable will go over that, and when you do the movement, the cable will go through that cam. Those are called cams. But anyway, so as mentioned, there are circular cams. Circular cam is just circular, and it will produce a constant resistance throughout the movement. Think of just a pulley, basically. Then there are oblong cams, which increase the resistance as the cable rides along the wider part of the cam, which will produce a different resistance curve, of course. And furthermore, machines typically have either shortened or lengthened levers to either magnify or diminish the resistance or load being delivered to a target muscle. Now, most gym machines actually have machines which make you feel good because you use a lot of weight on them. They have double, triple pulley systems. They have very short levers. They have compounded levers so you can actually move more so-called weight so you feel better. But I mean, that doesn't mean that they're useful. I mean, there's a cable machine at one of the gyms I went to. I mean, it doesn't matter too much, but I would typically be doing a 50-pound movement, and with this particular cable machine, I had to bump it up to 140 pounds, just because the machine was so screwed up with a 3-block pulley system to make you feel good. Silliness, guys. So anyways, in addition to the various resistance sources that we just discussed, there are other forces that are not visible, and they're not really obvious unless you know what to look for. But if you do know what to look for, they greatly influence the efficiency of many of your exercises, or your weight training, basically. So centrifugal force is a force that you basically don't ever want to use. It's momentum. It's a force that is generated as a consequence of rapid circular movement. So just a reminder of Newton's first law of motion: an object at rest stays at rest and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. So when you have this particular form of rotational resistance, this form of resistance comes from a particular movement wanting to continue along its path that has been launched as it is rotating along its axis. Now, a simple way I like to try to visualize this is just a sling. I'm referring to the antique weapon which David used to defeat Goliath, shepherd's weapon. A sling is a simple projectile weapon, in case you didn't know. It's typically used to throw a blunt projectile like a stone, a pebble, a lead ball, etc. A sling is just a small cradle or a small leather pouch between two lengths of cord. This sling stone, or the weight in this case, is placed in the pouch. The middle finger and thumb is placed through a loop at one end of the cord, and a tab on the other end of the cord is placed between the thumb and the forefinger. The swing is then slung in an arc, like so. You've seen people use these, I'm sure. And the tab is released. You let go of one string at the precise movement. The stone, or whatever it is, then flies like a bullet towards its target, and this is made possible by adding the centrifugal force by generating the twirling movement. Same reason you'll see spear guys and sword guys and guys who want to throw a hard kick, they'll spin their body first. But anyways, just by using a sling, it just turns a stone into a bullet, and all you did was spin it, essentially. But obviously this is something you don't want to do in weight training. It would be helpful in sports, perhaps the hammer throw, you'd need to know how to do this. But in conventional weight training, at least the intelligent variety, you don't want to do this. Some obvious examples would be kettlebell swings, kipping pull-ups, abdominal ball throws, these kinds of things. When you're exercising for maximum muscle development, your objective should be to load a muscle with resistance, which causes the muscle to deliberately contract against that resistance until it is fatigued and the muscle fibers are frayed or damaged. Now, this process will lead to increased size, strength, and endurance, obviously provided you're sleeping and protein and all that other stuff. Now, I could go on for hours and hours about these subjects, and I have in my many books and articles, over 500 lectures on YouTube. And just a reminder, guys, if you click on my little photo beneath the videos, it'll take you to my channel where you can see all my playlists and all my videos. It's just a good way to go through my stuff. I have over, I think, 600 videos actually at this point. So make sure you're going through the old stuff. My oldest video is 2 years old, I think, maybe 2.5 years old. Stuff's all really good. The information's the same information I'm giving nowadays. Just letting you know, check it all out. Now make sure if you want to contact me, everything's in the description below. If you want to go to my Etsy store, my website, my Instagram, my Facebook, contact me for a live lecture, online coaching, any of these things. You guys know how to find me. It's all linked in the description. And again, just if you're going to be exercising, making your life better, why wouldn't you want to do it the most efficient way? The least amount of time in the gym, the least amount of everything, but magnifying your results 100-fold. Of course you'd want to do it. So you should. So it's time you learned about physics, at least the basics, guys, and you start applying to your exercise. I would highly recommend you guys check out my Etsy store and all of my materials there, my many books, and of course my many lectures and my many YouTube videos as well. I cover a tremendous amount of stuff that you just won't find anywhere else. And I'm always uploading. I got 3, 4, 5 new videos every single week, podcast interviews. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and of course, leave a comment, a like, share the video. It helps the channel grow. It helps my message and my information get to more people. So I hope this helps everybody. I hope it wasn't too complicated for you. And if you have any questions about it, just reach out to me, okay? Everybody have a great day. Train intelligently and stay on your grind.